Good day. Terrence Walker with Intero Consulting Partners, here to present today's webcast. Today's webcast will be based on our Extending Your Financial Consolidation and Close solution, more specifically, Oracle Consolidation Suite bonus modules and new features. And again, my name is Terrence Walker with Intero Consulting Partners. I'm actually generally excited whenever I get to see this particular slide because it speaks so much to who we are and what our charge is as a company. Our goal is to build strong, collaborative connections with our clients to help them glean meaningful insights from their data analytics that ultimately drives improved business performance. Or more specifically, our charge is to simply leave the world a smarter place than we found it. We're also based on relationships. More specifically, our branding speaks that we are based on interrelationships. And from a definitional perspective, we view that as the way in which two or more things or people are connected and affect one another. A bit about our company as far as commendations that we received. We are the reigning 2019 Oracle Analytics Partner of the Year and the Oracle Global and North America Partner of the Year. As far as our partnerships, we are an Oracle Cloud Excellence Implementer, an Oracle Cloud Select Partner, and we are also the OD-TUG Kscope 20 Titanium sponsor. On our staff, we have 4 Oracle ACE Directors and ACEs. We've also penned more than 10 of the best-selling books on Hyperion, S-Space, Oracle BI, and the EPM Cloud. Some corporate highlights. We're a company who is solely focused on enterprise performance management and business intelligence since 1997. We have implemented over 1,000 EPM projects, and more specifically from a cloud perspective, we are much closer to 100 successful EPM cloud implementations. From a consultancy perspective, our consultants range from an experience perspective. We have over 9+ years of EPM experience as well. As we proceed to speak to today's webcast, and again, the primary focus on today's webcast is adding additional tools to your tool belt from an EPM perspective. More pointedly, we'll speak to Supplemental Data, Task Manager, Configurable Calculations, as well as some new EPM business processes. First, we'll start with Supplemental Data in the EPM Cloud. What exactly is Supplemental Data? Supplemental data is a means of collecting additional data or details that might be more granular than a corresponding EPM, or more specifically, a financial consolidation and close cloud application might entail. The majority of the content for supplemental data might be user footnoting or additional levels of disclosure that might not be easily captured in a consolidation application, given that the actual SD application has a means of extending that level of detail that we can use for our reporting. As well as the corresponding configurations or the development definitions for supplemental data, the first definition is to produce or to create the data set. And the data set is no more than a definition for the data that is to be collected in the application. We have different opportunities as far as what can be included in the data set. The data set can simply be relative to the actual application's dimensionality. We can also extend supplemental data to also include some attributes that might not exist in the FCC application as well. And from a pure development perspective, those users who have been provisioned as either service administrators or as power users have the wherewithal to be able to create and to update our data set definitions. Once we create our data set definitions, we would then transition to actually developing the data form templates. And again, the data form templates are fairly akin or fairly similar to other data forms that might exist in the other EPM applications, Again, from a supplemental data perspective, we actually are depicting the actual content in our definitions of data form templates, in that we first define the actual properties of the actual template, name convention, some form of a descriptor for it, the corresponding instructions for the preparers or whomever to help them or to assist them in performing their specific data submissions. We also define the corresponding sections, which basically define what the actual data form might look like for submission or review for the corresponding preparers and or reviewers. We'd also define the workflow. And in our workflow definition, we define the corresponding options from a frequency perspective, the corresponding start end dates for our actual data submission definitions as far as the duration when users should actually submit that content. We'd also go in and we define also the corresponding workflow definitions as far as the corresponding workflow content or the actual people who'd actually go in and would be able to impact that corresponding data set that might be submitted via our data forms. We're also able to define or submit some form of certification questions to confirm that the preparer and or the approvers are actually going through and fulfilling their actual charge in the submission of these data sets into the application. We also have the ability to be able to find who has the wherewithal to view the corresponding data form templates, as well as being able to see any transformations or changes of the data form template in the data form templates history. Once we've actually defined the corresponding data form template, we then have the wherewithal to deploy that template for the users to be able to access and use those data form templates based on the start end date definitions and our definitions for the actual data form templates as well. When we speak to that actual data collection period, that again is relative to when the actual data form or the actual period will be open for submission, it's a fairly straightforward definition in that we're simply saying that for a corresponding financial period, we're going to define the corresponding start and end date for actual data collection definitions, when users can go in and perform actions in corresponding data forms or what have you. Again, once we've actually defined those definitions, we then have the wherewithal to define when that specific data form collection period will be open, closed, or we can actually lock it. Again, we have a couple of options for actually performing that action, in that there is an actual actions menu on the individual rows by period on the right that are denoted by the ellipses, as well as just below the actual scenario and year or the point of view in our data collection period. There are 3 icons that also depict the open period, closed period, and locked period designations for our data collection periods also. More holistically, when we talk about what the actual supplemental data collection workflow looks like, this actually depicts it in specific detail as far as what the true actions are. More specifically, the actual requirement is first, select the actual data collection period that we want to use for the corresponding period. We define the year, period, and scenario definitions. We would then transition to deploying our form templates from our form template wizard. We would then open the period to start the actual data collection process. Once that's done, again, based on our data form templates definitions, the corresponding users, preparers, and or approvers would then receive some form of notification to let them know that an action is required. And given that supplemental data is tied into task management, the actual users would have the actual actions that are required to fulfill this particular charge from a little SD perspective included in their work list. Once that user actually goes through and accesses the data form from the work list or what have you, they would then actually start the data entry process. Again, that can be from differing workflow levels. Again, from a pure definitional perspective, we might have a preparer, we might also have an approver. We'd also have an integrator who is theoretically a poster. Again, that integrator literally posts that specific content, those data sets, into our FCC application. And again, from a pure highlighting perspective, we will elect to close a period. That simply means that no data entry is allowed from that point forward. Although some data collection process may still continue that work in the back end or the background. And then lastly, from a period lock perspective, that simply means that no further changes are allowed in that financial period. or better yet, that no data collection is allowed in that period from a pure definitional perspective. And there are no background or processes running once we elect to lock a supplemental data period. As we go through and talk through the actual entry process within supplemental data forms, again, as we mentioned earlier, the simple means of accessing our forms is through the task manager's task or work list views or functionality. Once we've elected to access that corresponding supplemental data form, we then, as a preparer, have the wherewithal to either elect to add additional rows in our supplemental data form, or the user might also have the ability to be able to import rows into their supplemental data form template from a CSV file. Once that data set has been imported or integrated into the supplemental data form, the user will simply then elect to save that data set into supplemental data. After electing to save that supplemental data into the actual form template itself, that preparer or the user would have the wherewithal to then elect to submit that specific content based on our workflow process. And again, in some, maybe not all, of our workflow definitions for our data forms, there might be some form of workflow options from a workflow perspective to define that there would be a named preparer and or a named poster or integrator. Once that specific workflow process proceeds from submission, the integrator, the poster, would then have the wherewithal then to elect to accept or reject that specific submission. If they elect to accept it or approve it, then we would then go to the process of posting that data set into the FCC application. And again, as a byproduct of the submission process for our preparers, as we alluded to earlier, there might be some certification questions that might be required of the preparer. Once that specific certification question would be completed, that specific period would then have the ability to submit that specific data form content to the next level approver if one did exist. Also, we speak to supplemental data in that in most of the EPM platforms, we have the wherewithal also to access supplemental content within the Oracle Smart View add-in. More specifically, we have the wherewithal to see the SD forms in Smart View or in Excel, and the exact same workflow opportunities that we have over the web are also available to us in the Smart View world or Smart View in Excel, and that the preparer might have the ability to add additional rows into that specific template, and then they can follow through and complete the actual submission of content based on the predefined workflow definitions for that data form template itself. We'll next transition to speaking to Task Manager in the EPM Cloud. What is Task Manager? Task Manager is the formerly known closed manager functionality that has been ported into the EPM Cloud. It is a means of collecting and defining different tasks, and also gives us the wherewithal to produce schedules from those well-ordered or defined tasks as well. Task Manager currently exists as a module of the Financial Consolidation and Close application, but the EPM Cloud roadmap dictates that Task Manager will be available across all, or better yet, each of the EPM Cloud solutions. Also of record or of note, Task Manager can also be installed as a standalone product, which I recall being Oracle Task Management will be the standalone product for Task Manager. Let's transition to speak to actually what do we speak to when we're speaking to Task Manager, what it actually entails. In most worlds, the closed calendar has either been a definition in Excel or maybe in some other calendar application like maybe a SharePoint. And again, we're defining actual tasks that are to occur during a specific period of time. While again, Excel is an awesome means of tracking or tracing closed details, there are some limitations that Excel offers from a pure management perspective in dynamically tracking and tracing actual closed activities. When we speak to the actual definitions or content of the close that might be included in Excel, again, that list can be fairly lengthy, from a pure content perspective. The pure definitions in the Agile form may or may not be accurate. And then the corresponding task assignments might also be inaccurate as well. In that our reality is, given that the actual work flow definitions from an assignment perspective can change over time, and our available resources may change over time as well, there is a high probability that the actual definitions for that specific level of assignment may grow stale or may be in need of reinvention to be reassigned to different or differing users from a pure assignment perspective. In doing that, we were talking about some additional inadequacies of the closed management model, we'll say, in Excel. We don't necessarily have a true view of the world as far as where we truly stand at most points in time, simply meaning that there is an expectation that there will be some form of communication, no matter what the platform might be. Our reality is that the communication portal, when we're leveraging some form of closed management using Excel, might not be as up to date as we'd hope, given that in most cases, that communication stream is much more based on either verbal communication or some form of email notification to the actual task creator or the schedule owner. That said, again, we're speaking to Excel and some of the concerns that we have as far as communication. Again, as we mentioned earlier, the simple reality is there really isn't any true form of understanding status of corresponding task, and if there are some tasks that have some form of relations or they're related, there really isn't any true form of dynamic communication of impacts to successor tasks if there isn't a reason that a predecessor task might be impacted or might be delayed in delivery. So again, we have much more limited communication via this form of task management versus our task management solution in the EPM cloud. We're talking about task management in EPM cloud. It's literally no more than, again, as we mentioned in our definition of our webcast today, it is a submodule of the EPM cloud. More specifically, today, it is a submodule of financial consolidation and close. The simple accessing of the application or the module is fairly straightforward in that there are cards, and within those cards, there's corresponding functionality that allows us to access the actual functionalities of Task Manager. And again, that also differs based on our pure definitions from an accessing perspective, which simply means that for actual developers or administrators, there are different views or access points for task management or task manager that will be available to corresponding end users from a use case perspective. We also want to make sure we point out that Task Manager is not simply an Oracle EPM solution. Task Manager can also be used to integrate with Oracle ERP solutions or other ERP solutions or even non-Oracle products from a pure content perspective, in that we can link either to other Oracle EPM applications like FCC, Reconciliations Cloud, Planning Cloud, or even link back from an integration perspective to Oracle EBS or maybe even Oracle Fusion Cloud as well. When we talk about the pure definitions of Task Manager's pure definition is based on a template. A template is no more than a collection of relatable business processes, and from a pure definition perspective as well, these particular templates can be deployed or created based on differing factors. We know that that can either be based on pure definitions, some form of compliance definition, or maybe even some geographic region that would dictate the relationships for those repeatable business processes. Once we define the corresponding task template, we then have the ability to be able to produce a schedule. Again, that schedule, once it's deployed, then becomes available to our user community for going in and attesting to the completion of the defined task in our task templates, will ultimately spun into schedules. This view actually speaks to or depicts what a task template includes. Again, we can define related tasks and groupings by defining a parent task. And again, we also have the wherewithal to see the corresponding definitions from a duration perspective for our task, in that we could define a start and end date for a task. And again, we're talking about a distinction between templates and schedules. Templates are based on business date definitions, where when we actually create a schedule from a template, those corresponding business days are transformed into actual calendar days. We also have the wherewithal to see the corresponding workflow definitions, whether that be the assignee, or signers, in that we have the ability also to name multiple users as assignees from a team perspective, as well as being able to also see from a view perspective any approvers that might be defined for corresponding tasks as well. As far as the schedule, again, as we mentioned, the actual schedules are no more than a depiction of a template's content. In the schedule creation, we actually are displaying the actual schedules with schedule creation wizard. In the schedule creation wizard, we are depicting or giving a name for the corresponding schedule. We're also assigning a year period for the actual deployment of that schedule. We also denote the day 0 date as far as the last date of the period that is reflected in our basis for the definitions of when the actual schedule days are to be assigned. We'll also make note that in the need of the definition of our schedules, there's also a need to define or assign an organizational unit. And that organizational unit might also include some form of holiday rules to make certain that any scheduled tasks that are to be performed would not be defined or assigned as tasks to be performed on a holiday, so that we wouldn't have any impacts as far as availability for our users. You'll also make a note, again, just as a callback. We made reference to our templates. Our templates spoke to business days, day -5 through day 15 or what have you, or corresponding from a schedule perspective. Our schedules actually speak to actual true calendar days based on our schedule definition within our wizard that speaks to the year and the period that we're deploying that corresponding schedule. This is no more than a view of the holiday rules that we spoke to, and that again, we have the wherewithal within our organizational unit definitions to include also holiday rules. Again, those holiday rules are also used in our schedule development to ensure that no tasks are assigned on any holiday rules, to ensure that we don't have any confusion from an expectations perspective for our assigned users in our workflow process. When we speak to scheduled actions, we have different abilities from a development perspective as far as being able to automate certain activities within the actual schedule definitions. We highlight a few, and that as an application administrator, we have the wherewithal to reassign tasks from a named user to a different user. An example may be that we might have a user who might be on PTO, and there might be a need to reassign their assigned task to a different user. We can leverage the reassign user functionality to holistically reassign all tasks from a named user or users to different users to make the actual schedule process flow more seamlessly versus having any bottlenecks by simply having tasks assigned to users who don't have the wherewithal to access the application. We can also define that specific task that may have some form of automation from other systems that we can verify that that named user has access to that system using our authorized task functionality, which is no more than an additional means of ensuring that the named user who's assigned to perform a task that might have some relation to some outside application, that actual user has access to that named application from a definition perspective for performing that task. We also have the means of validating the corresponding schedule to ensure that the corresponding schedule's definitions of properties are true, to ensure that there are no issues when we elect to open that specific schedule for use. And then lastly, we have the ability from an actions perspective to produce a report binder, which is no more than the collection of all of the schedule's content into a single zip file that we have the ability to be able to review that corresponding content in a single repository of details for that corresponding schedule. From a task workflow perspective, again, as we're going through and defining the pure definitions for task management, at the individual task level, we would have the ability to assign either an assignee or backup, or as we mentioned earlier, a team of users. We then also define the duration of the actual task as far as how long we expect that a task should take to complete. More specifically, we'll define the start and end dates. And again, from a pure template perspective, that is based on a business date, day 1 through day 2 in our example. We also have the wherewithal to define a minimum duration for how long the minimum expectation would be for completing said task, as well as being able to define or allow for starting a specific task, early. And then lastly, in our definitions for workflow, we'd have the ability to be able to assign an approver if required, or maybe even a backup approver if required as well. We also, given that Task Manager is an application that is based on relationships, we also have the wherewithal to define predecessor relationships. We actually highlight those predecessor relationships that are available to us within Task Manager. Most, not all, but most of our task management or manager relationships are based on a finish to start relationship, in that this simply denotes that the initial predecessor task must be completed before the successor task can actually start. That in most cases is our default. But there are also some additional predecessor relationships that can be defined. Again, those examples being finish error to start, where the actual predecessor task can actually error out and the actual successor task can actually be started. We also have a finish error to finish, where the actual predecessor task must be finished or can be finished with an error before the successor task can actually be denoted as being a finished task. And then lastly, we can have a finish to finish relationship that simply notes that the successor task has to be related to the predecessor task, and that it must be finished before the successor task can be finished as well. From a task reassignment perspective, we also have the ability to be able to allow our users or our preparers to go in and select to have a task reassigned as well. From the task actions menu, we note that the actual assignees can elect to go in and request that a reassignment be defined for that specific task itself. In the reassignment wizard, that specific user would simply go in and select or would assign a requested user who would be assigned a task in their stead. Once that specific assignee has been selected, the corresponding requester would then elect to define the actual reassignment's duration. And the reassignment duration simply speaks to if I simply want to have this task reassigned to a different user for this corresponding period, or if I want this particular task reassigned to the user this period and for all subsequent scheduled creations. So again, this is no more than asking that if a task is incorrectly assigned, do we want to go back into the actual schedule, into the template to have that specific task assigned to that new user, so that new user will be assigned as the named preparer or the approver for all subsequent schedules to be created. The corresponding user would also offer some form of justification from a communication perspective as far as the reasons or reasoning for the reassignment request. Once that corresponding reassignment request has been submitted, the request would go to the actual application's owner. That specific application owner, or better yet, the scheduler templates owner, or the application's administrator, would then go through the actual approval process to determine if that reassignment is going to be approved. As far as approval options, the schedule owner or the administrator will either elect to approve, reject, or the specific schedule's owner could elect to assign that specific task to a different user other than the actual user that the original preparer or the approval would have requested. Once that specific request has been approved and the reassignment has been completed, the corresponding new task would then appear on the reassigning user's work list. We'll next speak to the actual integration models that we spoke to. In that, as we mentioned earlier, Task Manager is not an application that is specific to the Oracle EPM suite of applications. We also have the ability to be able to connect to other applications. More specifically, in this example, we're speaking to our ability to connect to Oracle EBS or even Oracle Fusion, in that we can perform certain actions from Task Manager in those other Oracle ERP layer applications as well. There's also an ability, we're not displaying it, but there's also ability, as I mentioned, to also be able to connect to other Oracle EPM applications that we actually depict in the initial couple of bullets there for account reconciliation and consolidations. And just to denote that we do have, based on our connectivity within the EPM cloud, to be able to access and perform actions from within Task Manager across both the EPM layer and the ERP layer for both on-prem and cloud-based applications. As far as task performance, there are a number of different options that we'll be able to realize in the application as far as how we succeed through the actual task management processes themselves. This is no more than a view of the actual view of a schedule and an open task that may have some form of relationship. The one that we speak to would be task ID number 15, the review currency rates, which is no more than a task that is linked to FCC, which allows us to actually open an FCC form to complete an action. And the simple ask is that the name preparer will go into FCC and will review that corresponding form within FCC. Once that specific name preparer would perform that specific action and is completed, that specific user would go in and simply elect to submit that task for approval. Once that specific task is submitted for approval, there may be some form of notification depending on if there's a subsequent approver in our workflow process to denote that once that specific task is submitted for approval, then that user would no longer have access to that corresponding task on submission. And again, our workflow definitions for all our tasks are based on named users, whether that might be a single user or a team of users. And again, once that specific user elects to submit it, it is then going to be transitioned to the approver to perform their actual action from an approval's perspective. Once that specific actual action is transmitted to the approver would then also have the wherewithal to access said form in FCC to confirm that the corresponding content is accurate. And again, that corresponding approver could elect to either approve or reject that specific task. As a means of just actually visualizing what the actual views in Task Manager dictate, we're noticing that in the actual status field of the actual schedule, we'll note that the corresponding tasks have individual icons that denote actual task status. When the actual task has been opened, there is a green right pointing arrow. Any task that has a clock or a blue icon is a pending task that may have some relation to a different task, or that corresponding task start date has not been reached. So again, in this particular example, the review currency rates form has been open. That corresponding preparer has gone in and performed a specific action on that form. Ultimately, the approver on that form will then go in and approve it. Again, once a specific task has been approved, the actual status reflection for that task would then change from being open to having a green check to show that particular task has been completed. And also, any corresponding tasks that are related to that corresponding task from a definition perspective would transition from having a pending status to actually being reflected as being open. There are also dashboards that are available to us within the Task Manager suite of products, in that the actual compliance dashboard that we're showing has different features, and that the compliance dashboard is a view from a little user or organization perspective to be able to track or trace the actual status for corresponding submissions or actions by named users or by definitions from an organizational unit perspective, just to be able to track or trace the actual status of activities assigned to users. We also have the ability to be able to track or review performance from different criteria, either for actual tasks that have been prepared, or actually be able to view this from a pure approvals perspective as well. And then as far as our ordering abilities, we have to actually have the ability to be able to order our dashboard content by user, by on-time status, or even being able to note this by either a late or rejected status as well. As far as reports, there are a number of pre-built reports that are part of the Task Manager solution as well. We note a few of them here. the actual the close compliance analysis report that we'll actually review. There are differing output formats. The actual output formats for reports that are pre-built include Excel, HTML, or even a PDF view. And again, the actual deployment of reports is fairly straightforward in that the actual report generation is fairly straightforward in its pure definitions, in that we can define a name for it. We can also associate this particular report with a specific schedule, and then we'd actually elect to actually run this report for a specific period. Once those criteria have been defined in the actual report generation wizard, we'd actually run this report. We'd actually see the corresponding status that relates to this report, to actually see that when it's successfully completed. Again, we would then be able to realize the output of our reports based on our output format. As we mentioned earlier, we also have the ability to be able to produce report binders. And again, report binders are no more than a collection of the content that relates to a specific schedule or a schedule's content. In producing a report binder, and again, it is an action menu generated action or activity. And again, we have the ability in the report binder definition to define the properties as far as a naming convention and a description for the report binder, as well as having the ability to elect the corresponding content or the components that we want to include in our report binder. We have the ability to include alerts that might exist as far as task alerts in the application. We have the ability also to include any commentary that might be included in the corresponding task as a byproduct of our workflow. We want to also elect to include any attachments that our preparers or approvers might also include in further assisting in adding additional detail as a means of completing our task in our monthly schedule process. Once we've actually elected to include each component that's required, we simply are required to go in and select to generate that corresponding binder. Again, as we noted in our other views from a reports perspective, once the corresponding binder has been generated, our actual status gives us a view as far as the content in that corresponding binder and the number of artifacts in that binder. We'll also make mention again that the actual binder is a zipped file which has an actual HTML collection of activities for each scheduled task in the zip file. Again, in that zip file, again, this is a depiction of the report binder in that each individual task in a schedule is actually included in a report binder. We can actually elect to view the actual content of these tasks by simply electing to select on the hyperlink in our task definition column to actually see the actual content that relates to each specific task in our report binder. And also the report binder also gives us the exact same view that we saw in our schedule view that includes the task status, any form of workflow definitions as far as our assignees, as well as the durations of our corresponding task from a pure definitional perspective. We'll next transition to speaking to our calculation options within FCC. Within the actual application, we'll note that there are many ways of calculating data within FCC. We actually highlight a few in our actual view of this actual slide, in that we can actually calculate data via the consolidation process. We might also like to include some form of member formula for dynamically defined members. We might also like to create calculations from either configurable calculations, which are more form factor-driven calculations, or we can create calculations using customized scripting using our insertion rules. When we talk about insertion rules, there are basically three defined stages for where our actual insertion rules can exist. There is a local currency layer, there is a translated data layer, there's also the consolidated data layer, which again has specific components that are specific to the differing currency members in the actual application, as well as the corresponding consolidation dimension members, as far as how we elect to insert or calculate data in the different areas or stages, better yet, of our consolidation process. From within the actual calculation manager functionality in the application, or prior to accessing the calculation manager's functionality within FCC, we actually have the ability to be able to see those 3 individual stages. And within those 3 individual stages, there are actually indicators that actually denote the actual calculations that are pre-built into FCC, where there are a number of those pre-built calculations, as well as those areas where we can actually insert calculations in our FCC application. We actually depict the actual way of being able to realize what those are, and that those that include a pre-built definition have a gear icon that actually denotes that they are pre-built definitions that we don't have access to see the corresponding code or syntax definitions for. But we also have icons that might depict a person, or that might also have a hyperlink or a blue character definition that speaks of being able to access that specific content from within the actual FCC applications calculation manager. Once we actually elect to define or create specific calculations, there are specific criteria from a provisioning perspective that dictate who can perform actions from a configurable calculation or from an insertion calculation perspective. In that, the service administrator has the wherewithal to create, modify, and delete rules from within the application. Also, from a little use case perspective, the actual visibility in the actual rules is available for both users who are assigned into the service administrator group or role, as well as those who have the power user role group definition or assignment as well. As far as the ability to be able to create configurable calculations in the application, again, that is fairly straightforward in that it's a role-based definition. And again, from a pure definitional perspective, we have the ability to be able to create CD calculations, but we can't remove them. Again, those are pre-built, predefined in the application. But again, our reality is for those insertion-based rules, we have the ability to be able to create content, as well as delete that content as necessary from a use case perspective, or maybe even from an election to deploy content in our rules, or elect to undeploy those actual rules from insertion perspective in applications. When we speak to the actual CD calculations from an insertion perspective in our stages, there are 6 pre-seeded calculation definitions in our insertion rule definitions. Within our local currency definitions, there are 2. There is the after opening balance carry forward for local currency, as well as the final calculations for local currency. Within the translated stage, there is the after balance carry forward for translated data, as well as any final calculations for translated data. And then last, there is our consolidated stage, where we would have a insertion rule for after opening balance carry forward for consolidated data, as well as final calculations for consolidated data as well. Again, this caption actually speaks to where those insertion rules actually exist in the calculation manager. And again, there are 2 for each individual stage that we have the ability to be able to insert customized syntax into our application. Again, how does it work? We speak to, again, those insertion rules based on the consolidation, the local currency stage. Within the local currency view, there actually is, as I mentioned earlier, that specific rule definition is going to be based on data at the Indian currency or the local currency level, or a member of our currency dimension, as well as being focused on the entity input and the entity consolidation layer for, or level better yet, for parent entities within our consolidation dimension. And we also make note throughout this particular presentation that if ownership management isn't able, there are some additional levels that we can actually impact in our insertion rules for each of these corresponding stages. Within the translation stage also, we have the ability, as we mentioned earlier, to insert different levels of data. And again, we can access each of these particular insertion rules via the corresponding links within the actual views for our rules in FCC, and that there are insertion rules for, again, the after opening balance carry forward for translated data, as well as for final calculations. And again, as far as our currency and consolidation members that are impacted by these, that would include the parent currency member, again, for translated data, as well as in our consolidation dimension, the entity input and the entity consolidation member for our parent entities only. And then lastly, at the consolidated stage, The consolidation data stage also again has the 2 insertion points. Again, we're pointing specifically to the parent currency member within our currency dimension and the elimination member of our consolidation dimension. Now we speak to our ability to be able to update or amend these insertion rules. Once we elect to select the corresponding stage and the corresponding rule that we want to amend or update, it literally takes us into the actual calculation manager functionality of FCC, where we have the ability to go in and actually submit syntax into the application. Now, the one thing that you have to be very, very mindful of from a pure FCC calculation perspective is that there are certain criteria that are allowed for actual insertion rule definitions, and that there are specific dimensions that can be included or that are allowed from a use case perspective in our insertion rules. This particular example actually speaks to that in detail, and that we're noting that there's specific dimensions that are restricted in our fixed statements, and there's specific dimensions that are allowed in our fixed statements. And again, for the most part, those restricted dimensions and from a use case perspective are included in the actual calculations point of view. So they are not allowed from a pure use case perspective in our fixed statements. But again, the other corresponding dimensions in the actual application are available and they are allowed in our fixed statements. This actual grid actually speaks to more pointedly restricted members or preceded members, seated members in FCC that are restricted members from a use case in an actual equation. The left-hand side is no more than a depiction of the actual target for where the actual results of calculations will be targeted. The right side of the equation, or the right-hand side, actually speaks to the actual members or components that we're actually sourcing content as a part of our calculations. So again, for each individual dimension in our application, we're actually denoting the corresponding seated members where they can be used from the left or right-hand side in our calculations. Again, for all intents and purposes, these members, these seated members, cannot be used on the left-hand side of the equation because for some of these are part of the actual point of view of the application from a calc perspective, but they can be used as a means of sourcing data elements and deriving our resulting valuation based on our calculations. When we speak to scripting basics, this is no more than a depiction of functions that are available to us in our calculation definitions, in that we can define a fixed and fixed statement. We can also isolate our calculations on specific member sets, whether that be a list of members, some form of descendant relationships, or even siblings. We also have some conditional operators that we can elect to include in our calculations, including end, if, ending statements, as well as less than, greater than logical operators. We can also use some form of Boolean definition for using attributes of members to be able to use those as triggers for our calculations. We can also use our relationship definitions for generational levels, or generations or levels for where members exist in our dimensional hierarchies. And then last, we also have functions for being able to leverage mathematical definitions for absolute values or maybe variance reporting, as also a means of being part of our S-based calculation scripting in our insertion rules. And lastly, we'll actually speak to some simple sample script syntax, in that this is no more than a depiction of what the actual rule could look like in an application, in that we can actually open up this actual rule definition with a fixed and fixed statement, which again is part of our definitions for each of those individual insertion rules. And also we would define the corresponding content of the corresponding rules themselves. Of note, in this particular example, we're actually fixing on a member. So again, we're specifically noting that this actual calculation will be impacted for this particular member. And also we're noting that we want to calculate a valuation for sales. But in this particular example on the left, we're actually electing to include the scenario budget, which is a restricted dimension on the left-hand side of our actual calculations, or our formulas for calculation, which is not allowed. This simple calculation can be redefined by simply keeping our fixed statement definitions and simply electing to pivot the scenario to being part of the right-hand side of the equation, so that we can simply note that sales is no more than sales. Sales for television equates to sales from our budget scenario from a cross-dimensional definition within this actual calculation. Next, we'll speak to some new tools that are available to us to be added into our tool belt in the actual cloud. And we'll speak more pointedly from a literal definitional perspective, in that Oracle has actually transitioned their speak from a pure terminology perspective, and that prior to the last 6 months, we noted the cloud applications as being cloud services. We've since pivoted to being much more business process centric, in that from a pure financial consolidation perspective, we actually have multiple applications that sit within the actual financial close business process, including financial consolidations, account reconciliations, and tax reporting. There are also other business processes that are part of the other business process definitions for planning, narrative reporting, and also for enterprise data management. We also actually look at the actual pricing structure from a pure subscription perspective, in that there are two subscription definitions. First is the EPM standard, which includes functionality across multiple EPM business processes. And then there's also the EPM enterprise, which offers additional features and functionalities for those named business processes. And it also includes some additional business processes and the EPM enterprise licensing or subscription options. And again, from a pure definitional perspective, I purely look at this as being a single subscription definition, in that most of our clients, most of our prospective clients elect to leverage the enterprise licensing option, because this gives us the ability to be able to deploy any of Oracle's EPM applications from a use case perspective without limitation as well. Very important point to note. The enterprise license subscription model is void of any limitations theoretically across the varying EPM applications from a use case perspective. We speak to, again, more pointedly some of the actual applications that are part of the EPM standard subscription definition. As we mentioned, there are a number that are included. There are just simply, from an EPM application deployment perspective, some limitations that exist within those applications. Or conversely, from an enterprise subscription model, all of the applications or business processes functionalities are available to us, as well as the inclusion of some additional business processes from a simple use case perspective. More specifically, from a financial close perspective, the standard model allows us to include consolidations, account reconciliations, leverage both the task management functionality, and supplemental data. The enterprise subscription also offers the ability to leverage some advanced consolidation features, which simply means that standard subscription allows us to use only the pre-seeded calculations that are within FCC. The enterprise licensing model allows us to be able to create both configurable calculations as well as create insertion calculations for customized rule definitions in FCC. Also, from a reconciliation perspective, standard does not allow us to include the transactional matching model, as well as, more conversely, the enterprise subscription allows us to leverage the transaction matching model, and it also includes, within this enterprise licensing model, tax reporting. Also, from a financial reporting perspective, it also includes narrative reporting. Again, when we speak to narrative reporting, it is literally the next generation in financial reporting, in that it includes all of what we know from a pure financial reporting perspective and the current on-prem financial reporting solutions, then some. And that it also includes management reporting in a single solution, which again is no more than the inclusion of highly formatted reports. That again is just the next level or next step in financial reporting functionality or abilities. And narrative reporting also includes XBRL content, which is no more than disclosure management detail or content from an options perspective, which also allows us the ability to be able to create different or use or leverage different taxonomies. And again, it also includes our ability to be able to transition that on-prem disclosure management functionality into the cloud. We'll transition next to speaking to the reconciliation process itself, in that again, it is an additional business process that is available in both the standard and the enterprise subscription models. The biggest distinctor is that in the enterprise licensing model, account reconciliations also includes transactional matching. The actual account reconciliation application, again, has a very similar deployment than to Task Manager and to financial consolidation and close, and that there are specific features and functionalities for this actual module application. We also have dashboard that's available to us that's fairly comparable to that within Task Manager and within FCC. And also of note, Data Manager, which is the extract and transform and load utility, is also available to us for integrating data into the reconciliation process as well. Also, there is the Enterprise Data Management Solution, which is no more than a master data solution that allows us to manage master data or metadata in a single repository. Enterprise Data Management also gives us the ability to be able to manage metadata across multiple tiers. We can integrate or manage master data from an EPM layer. We can also use Enterprise Data Management or EDM for managing metadata for our EPM applications as well. And also the Enterprise Data Management model also includes some form of approvals to confirm that before the actual deployment of members or master data to either the ERP or the EPM layers, that specific content would be approved before deployment. At this point, we've actually spoken or had an opportunity to speak to each of the corresponding modules that work in concert within the financial consolidation and close model to allow us to have a much more robust feature set from a use case perspective, or quite simply allows us to have a more full tool belt within the EPM cloud. And again, the actual applications of models that we spoke to today include Supplemental Data Manager, Task Manager. We spoke also to the calculation features in our application, as well as some of the new EPM business processes. As we wrap up, we'll actually want to suggest that each of you elects to maybe venture out into reviewing our Play It Forward campaign, which is a collection of videos that are product specific. We have some introductions to new products, some new features and functionalities within those products. And again, that specific Play It Forward campaign can be accessed at epm.bi videos for our collections of Play It Forward videos from our BI gurus. We'll also suggest that for those of you who are electing to attend ODTUG's Kscope 20 conference in Boston, Massachusetts, June 28th through July 2nd, please use Interrel's discount code of IRC20 for a $100 discount on your Kscope 20 registration. Also, we'd like to make sure that you guys are also aware of some of our books on BI and EPM, and that we have a number based on cloud-based applications, including OAC, Planning Cloud, and Narrative Reporting, as well as some other on-prem books based on Essbase and Oracle Hyperion SmartView. We'll also like to make note that the State of Business Analytics 20 survey process is now open. So again, for those of you who would like to know, or basically like to dictate or iterate how you're currently using your EPM or BI solutions, or you like to know how others are using their EPM or BI solutions, please go in and complete the SOBA 20 survey at epm.bi survey to participate in our SOBA 20 forum. And again, as a result of the collection of all of our content from SOBA, we will have a really protracted webcast that speaks to our findings. We'll also speak to the upcoming View of the World from a literal EPM and BI perspective by our trusted leader, Edward Roski. As far as our upcoming webcast, in the month of December, we have 3 webcasts. the future of S-Space, which is no more than an encore of our most well-attended webcast relative to S-Space and the future of S-Space. We'll then, mid-month December, have 2 webcasts that are offered from our partners at Oracle, or Oracle's product development group, that's fixed to what's coming in planning in 2020 and what's coming in consolidations in 2020. And we'll wrap up the end of the year with no webcast for the week of December, the week of Christmas, as well as no webcast the week of New Year. So again, this is no more than a depiction of our upcoming webcast in the month of December. And to also make note that there will be 2 weeks that we won't have webcasts due to the holidays. With that, I would like to thank you for attending today's webcast. My name is Terrence Walker. I greatly appreciate you for attending today's webcast. Thank you very much.